All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us for our June NAA webinar. We're really excited to have Seth Cross with USDA Farm Service Agency here with us. Just want to do a little housekeeping before we kick things off and hand it over to Seth. First off, everybody for right now is going to be on mute. We're going to save and have a Q&A session at the end once Seth wraps up his presentation. Before I introduce Seth, we just want to say thanks to this month's webinar sponsor, Blue Thumbs Consulting. They handle everything from system design, construction, and operation for aquaculture facilities. But they also are involved heavily with aquaculture workshops, staff training, protocol development, and things like that. So Katie and Tyler are based out of South Florida, but they work all the way around in the U.S. So there's their name and email over there on the side of my background, and feel free to reach out to them. We really appreciate them sponsoring our webinar this month. So Seth Cross is going to be speaking with us today. Just a little bio on Seth. He's currently the National Program Manager for the Emergency Assistance Program for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish, or ELAP, as well as the Livestock Indemnity Program, LIP. And he works for the USDA Department of Agriculture Farm Service Agency Safety Net Division. Seth graduated from the University of Nebraska with a business degree in administration and finance. Prior to becoming the National Program Manager for ELAP and LIP, Seth served as a National Program Specialist for the Non-Insured Disaster Assistance Program, or NAP, which some of you all may be also familiar with. He started his career with FSA as a County Executive Director and worked as a State Specialist in Nebraska. Seth also grew up on a farm and ranch in Western Nebraska and has worked for USDA for 19 years. So we really appreciate Seth's time today to come and talk about ELAP specifically for aquaculture. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Seth. Look forward to the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Charlie.
And the chat is open, folks. Stick your any kind of questions or anything like that along, and we'll answer those and address them as we go through the presentation. So, all right, fire away, Seth.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Well, give me just a minute here. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to pop up with the presentation. So forgive me. Hopefully this works the way I want it to. All right. Well, thanks everybody for bearing with me there as I get the slide presentation ready to go. But yeah, what I'm going to do is just basically give you an overview of ELAP under the Farm Service Agency as it pertains to aquaculture, and discuss everything that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years for ELAP's implementation for farm-raised fish. You know, prior to 2021, only the bait fish and game fish were covered under the ELAP program. But effective in 2021, the deputy administrator at the time determined to go ahead and expand the coverage of losses for farm-raised fish, along with those other types of fish raised in a controlled environment as approved by FSA. So in 2021, in May, FSA rolled out that policy to implement the coverage of the farm-raised fish, and that includes fin fish and mollusks. Reptiles are still not covered under ELAP. The statute itself does require it to be fish, but of course mollusks are included in that along with fin fish. So when we rolled that out in 2021, we did ask FSA state committees, who are they are appointed officials. They were tasked with finding as much information as possible about those producers that raise farm-raised fish in their states. And then they were asked to go ahead and make determinations of the following information, including the average fair market value for those eligible farm-raised fish or aquaculture in their state, and then establish a normal mortality for all eligible farm-raised fish that are in their state. The state committees and the national office worked together, and in order to obtain all of that information, we worked with countless universities, aquaculture experts, aquaculture and shellfish associations, the Fish and Wildlife Service experts, NOAA, and any other experts that FSA could find nationally and by state. And one of the things that had already happened a long time ago is the NAP program, which I worked in prior to coming to work in the ELAP portion. NAP does cover aquaculture as well. Now, it has a little bit of a different coverage than ELAP. ELAP doesn't cost anything, whereas NAP works more like crop insurance. You do have to take out a policy in order to be covered under the NAP program. But based on the regulation itself, NAP and ELAP both are going to use the same average fair market values, and ELAP is regulated to use the NAP process in order to calculate that average fair market value. What that means is that we have to use an Olympic average of the 5 previous years of average fair market values if it's available, and dropping the high and the low, and then calculating the average of the remaining 3. Or if there isn't 5 years available, to take a straight average and or the best available information that's out there to calculate a fair market value. Now, why is this important? Well, because one of the things that FSA requires is that we can't just establish a fair market value based off of anecdotal data. We do have to have some type of information provided by one of these experts or a university in order to calculate that average fair market value. There are some situations where, we may be limited in the number of producers actually growing a certain type of aquaculture, where the market itself is very limited. It's quite difficult for us to get that information, but if we have data available, especially for items like catfish, for instance, where we have NAS available pricing, typically FSA is going to use that because that is available data that is complete and accurate. So we're able to use that to establish those market values. At the national level, which is me, and then I have 2 other people that are assistants to me as a program manager, we continue to work with NAA, as most of you are aware, to help improve the ELAP program. And we've had a great partnership so far, with Charlie and NAA, and we try to improve the ELAP program whenever we can. But a couple of those things that have yielded some progress is that we've had different types of meetings. We had a combination meeting with the Catfish Farmers of America, reaching out to our FSA county offices with training from catfish experts. And FSA was involved in that as well to help both parties learn more about the ELAP process. We also did something similar in New England with our mollusk farmers. We had a meeting with the state offices and the county offices, along with other producers, to help us kind of make some decisions or help improve the program for those producers and determine some of the eligible losses that may be, that may occur out in the field that maybe FSA wasn't aware of. We've also worked with NAA to produce acceptable prices for redfish. It is kind of a niche industry. We've worked together with NAA to help come up with a policy that we feel is that we're comfortable with in order to provide help to those producers that have suffered redfish losses. Most recently, here in 2024, we've worked with the crawfish industry in Louisiana and Texas to come up with a coverage that FSA determined was feasible for crawfish losses based off the 2023 extreme heat. Unfortunately, under ELAP for aquaculture, the regulations limit us from using drought as an eligible cause of loss. But we were able to come to the conclusion with LSU and Texas A&M about a policy for extreme heat that most producers suffered from in 2023 that affected their 2024 production. So as you can tell, we continue to work with whoever's available to try to come up with ways to cover different aquacultures types and under the ELAP program. We continue to work to produce more complete marketing size list prices for shellfish and finfish. We work with NAA to come up with those different sizes, and we work with the states and the producers as well. But NAA also helps FSA with outreach to attend events like this webinar, the National Aquaculture meeting that happened in San Antonio earlier this year. We were able to attend that. I've been able to travel and go to different places throughout the country and just see different aquaculture areas and go to different farms and really try to get to understand a little bit more about what FSA needs to do to improve the program in order to provide coverage for those producers. NAA has also introduced FSA to different working groups of aquaculture and established relationships with those specific species groups. I mean, probably the biggest one is Catfish Farmers of America. We have a great relationship with them. We've worked with the crawfish producers in Louisiana and their, at the Farm Bureau and their association down there. So we have good standing relationships with a lot of these different groups, and we're still trying to build some of that up and to provide as much information as possible. We do continue to build that understanding of what causes loss. As I've notated before, we help work with Congress to update the ELAP program and answer inquiries. One of the things right now that's in the pending farm bill, if it's passed, would be the bird depredation piece of ELAP. Right now, ELAP does not cover bird depredation for aquaculture, but I know Congress is working to maybe implement that into the future program. So we continue to work, with Congress and with all of you to provide as much information as we can to help update the program to provide more coverage. We also work with NAA to give examples of understanding when it comes to marketing species and life cycles to go to a marketable product. As most of you are aware, aquaculture is all over the board in marketing and the life cycles, and just the variations from one region to another can be quite dramatic when it comes to growing different types of aquaculture. Again, we continue to work with NAA to communicate the importance of supplying acceptable inventory reporting to maximize ELAP benefits. That's probably one of the bigger items that FSA needs. When I go through program eligibility portion, after I kind of give you the background of what ELAP is, we'll talk more about inventory and how important that is to FSA when we work through the regulation to provide coverage under ELAP for aquaculture. As I'd mentioned before, the NAP program, or the Non-Insured Disaster Assistance Program, and the ELAP program continue to work hand in hand. I've stated before that average fair market value is set using that Olympic average. That is regulatory, and we have to match NAP when we establish that for the ELAP program. The one good thing is that producers can earn a benefit from both NAP and ELAP for the same losses in the same year. ELAP and NAP are exempt under the multiple benefit exclusion at this time that's set under Congress. Unless there's something that changes in the Farm Bill, producers can get both. We encourage producers to sign up for NAP. It does require that you have to sign up for it prior to the disaster event occurring, whereas ELAP is a standing disaster program that you don't have to sign up for until the disaster event occurs. But there is, you can earn more payment if you apply for the NAP program and participate in ELAP at the same time. Under ELAP since 2021, the farm-raised fish payouts have been quite substantial. As you can see, in 2021, the first year that it was available, we paid out $111 million. 2022, that portion came down to about $67 million. And so far in 2023, and we're not done paying out 2023 applications yet, but we paid out a little under $49 million in 2023 as well. And obviously 2024, we're already starting payments on that. I don't have any information on the data there, but that will be coming shortly. And if you come to any of our webinars or go to any of our trainings or our outreach events, we'll start having some of that data as well. But typically, our 2023 program year should be about ready to close out, but we do still have some applications where county offices may need more information from the producer. So we haven't paid out all of our 2023 program year. I do expect that number to increase down the road. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fish eligibility under the farm-raised fish and how ELAP works when you're a producer. There's two different types of losses for aquaculture under ELAP. One of them, of course, is the physical loss of fish for farm raised. And the other is the farm raised fish feed losses. Most people aren't typically aware that we do cover that. It's simply a matter of if you have purchased feed out at your farm and there's a natural disaster event, we can reimburse you for that feed loss as well. So that's just another piece of the program that's available. Most of our losses are typically from the physical loss point of view. We don't end up paying very much for fish feed losses simply because that's typically not a disaster that happens unless there's some type of hurricane or a tornado that takes that feed out. The eligible loss conditions under ELAP are include but aren't limited to earthquakes, excessive heat, excessive wind, floods, hurricanes, tidal surge, tornadoes, volcanic eruption, freeze, and eligible adverse weather. I would just tell you excessive heat and under ELAP is typically there's a standard set by our state committees in each state for excessive heat for the different types of aquaculture. They establish that threshold of what's eligible under excessive heat. And then they send that up to the deputy administrator for review in order to make that determination about what is eligible. Again, you'll also notice the drought is not on there. The reason the drought's not on there for an eligible loss condition is regulatory. The only items under the regulation for under this particular program that are eligible for drought are feed and livestock transportation. So unfortunately for aquaculture, drought's not eligible. And there would have to probably be some kind of an effort from Congress to include that in the next farm bill if we were to make drought an eligible cause of loss under ELAP. So we talked a little bit about our state committees. Of course, they're appointed and they change with every administration change. They establish that normal mortality and average fair market value, like I'd stated before, and they do have to get that information from some of our partners or from university officials or experts in that field or area. They can't just arbitrarily set that price and or market value. And that's with everything with the exception of ornamental fish. Ornamental fish is handled a little bit differently. Typically, they're put into a price basket because of the way they're raised. There's a little bit different way that we handle those ornamental fish. There may be, because of the variety, typically they're grouped into certain categories, and then we pay based off of the category that those ornamental fish are in. ELAP compensates farm-raised fish producers for the farm-raised fish death loss that occurs in the excess of normal mortality because of an eligible loss condition. And that's important because what we do is that we base our production losses off of inventory records. If the state has established NAP mortality rates for applicable farm-raised fish, NAP normal mortality rates have to be used for ELAP. However, if NAP does not have coverage in that state for that particular aquaculture, ELAP then would have to establish that normal mortality rate. And then NAP would follow along. If anyone ever applied for NAP, then we would be able to use that same normal mortality for both programs. Typically what happens with NAP, if we never had coverage for a particular type of aquaculture before, the producer does have to come in and file that application for NAP ahead of time. And they need to do that before the sales closing date for aquaculture, which I believe is September 30th of every year. And if we've never covered it before, then NAP would work with ELAP to establish whether or not we would be able to cover that. Sometimes with NAP, if there's a different type of crop that no one's ever grown in that state before, there's different rules and regulations as far as what can be covered under the NAP program. But ELAP is a little bit freer under the regulations. We've been able to cover fish right away after a disaster event, typically, as long as we can find prices and mortality rates for that particular species. So the payments for a specific kind or type of farm-raised fish is based on the number of pounds or pieces, depending on the state office submission of fish loss, by subtracting the ending inventory from the beginning inventory of the specific kind or type of fish just before the loss condition, and then after the loss condition, ensuring that normal mortality has been reduced from the number of pounds of fish lost. In essence, what that means is that if you do suffer a loss under the farm-raised fish program under ELAP, you have to give us a beginning inventory and then give us an ending inventory after the disaster occurs. And we take your beginning inventory and we subtract the ending inventory. And if we apply a normal mortality to that, then you get paid on the total of lost fish minus that normal mortality. Now, for ELAP purposes, normal mortality is not required to be applied if a producer is able to provide a recent beginning inventory that would be considered acceptable by the county committee. How recent that is, typically we would say within 30 days of the disaster event occurring. Well, how do we do that? Part of the thing is, and I know Charlie wanted me to touch on this, and I usually do at the end of my training, but I think it's important at this point, is that if you are an aquaculture producer and you have never been a part of FSA, I would encourage you to come in and talk with FSA. You need to call and set up an appointment. Most offices require an appointment to be able to come in and visit, but I would go in and talk to FSA before I ever suffered a loss event. We do have some requirements that you do have to certify your crop every year, and that deadline is September 30th of each year. So that's coming up later this fall. You have to certify the area where your catfish or any other aquaculture is located, depending on the type of fish that you raise. We also take surface acres of water, depending on the different type of fish that you have. If there isn't a specific surface acres of water measurement for the typical type of aquaculture, then we take a geodata location. We must have that location in the surface acres of water if required in order to participate in the ELAP program. If you late file that certification, we've been waiving the late file fee in the past. That actually runs out in 2024. The administrator has been very kind because the program is relatively new to the farm raised fish producers, and we have not been charging a fee for late filed certification of those crops. However, starting in 2025, that fee is going to start being applied, and you'll have to pay a late filed fee if you don't come in and certify your acreage or your location of your fish prior to that September 30th deadline. So a producer can certify their inventory losses if other producers in the area are suffering the same losses. However, if they are unable to support their inventory with some type of acceptable documentation, then a normal mortality rate has to be applied. In essence, what it really boils down to is I was encouraging you to tell producers that you need to come into the office and establish, your location of where those fish are. Should also be discussing the inventory records with that county office and how they want to get that information from you, or explain what you have for inventory records and what FSA would need if there were a disaster event to occur. If you can provide those information on a weekly or a monthly basis, and FSA knows that, there may be a possibility that you wouldn't have to provide necessarily a monthly report, but if it's available, that you can let FSA know that, and we can work with you to establish a way that you can provide that information, so the normal mortality rate could be waived. Again, as I said before, you need to work with your county offices to provide those inventory records, but also to work to develop a plan for each individual producer of how and when to provide those records and what to do if you do suffer from an eligible natural disaster event. As I told you before, the required documentation for ELAP farm-raised fish includes that acreage report. It's very important that we have that. If we don't have that, you are ineligible until we do have that. And then verifiable or reliable documentation of farm-raised fish death loss, beginning inventory, hopefully the day prior to the loss or sometime within that month, and an ending inventory. Any documentation requested by the county committee is to determine if the facility or environment is eligible could also be requested from the county committee. That's just part of participating in the ELAP farm program. There are some other requirements, eligibility requirements, AGI requirements that you have to fill out. So any producer that hasn't typically worked with FSA in the past, certainly would encourage them to go to their county office, set up that appointment, because you don't want to get to the point where when you're suffering your loss and you're at your busiest cleaning up your farm and trying to take care of all the items that happened during that disaster, that you don't have to spend 3 or 4 hours in the county office filling out eligibility paperwork. So it's better to be prepared and do that up front, and then to wait until you actually have a disaster event to come in and have to spend all that time within the county office. There is a national payment factor for farm-raised fish under ELAP. It's 75% of the calculated payment, or if you qualify under the definition of a beginning farmer or rancher, a limited resource producer, or qualifying veteran producer, then that rate is kicked up to 90% of the calculated total amount under the ELAP program. And with that, I know there's going to be questions, so I will stop sharing and I will open it up however you want to do the questions.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Seth. That was great. I guess before we open it up, and folks, if you want, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or we can just type a question in the chat and I'll be happy to read it off to Seth. But yeah, Seth, again, I really want to say thanks. Again, Farm Service Agency is a very decentralized federal government agency. It's really a great thing that, it's very likely, I think there's somewhere around 2,300 USDA service centers around the country. So there's Farm Service Agency folks right in your backyard. And we really want to encourage all NAA members and farmers out there to really, FSA can't help you if you don't go meet them in the middle and knock on their door and say hello. They're a service-oriented agency, and with this expansion of aquaculture all around the country, it's very important that farmers get in the door and talk to them about what's going on in their industry, teach them about your farm and farms in your area as well, and just help those county level staff help you. To touch on just a few points Seth mentioned already and things that we're working on, as he said, NAA is coordinating closely with Seth and the Farm Service Agency to make improvements continuously. The drought topic was mentioned already, and then another important one is that AGI potentially raising the adjusted gross income limitation that's currently on the program. And we're happy to say that, through our efforts in Congress, that is potentially going to pass in the Farm Bill in the future. It is in the House version of the Farm Bill draft. So with that, I do see we got one question already from Mark. And let's see. Seth, I'm not sure if you can see these, but Mark wants to know, is shrimp raised in outdoor ponds included in ELAP?
I do actually see that. Thank you, Charlie. And they can be eligible, but they do have to be in a controlled environment, meaning that the producer has to be able to control the water, and they have to be able to shield from depredation and all those other items that basically would it cannot be wild caught is really what it boils down to.
Right. Fritz had one. In the event of a windstorm or flooding, are farm infrastructure eligible as losses or livestock only?
Right now, infrastructure losses are not covered, and actually, they're not covered for livestock either. The only thing that they're really covered for is honeybees. We do have hive losses that are covered under ELAP, but the rest of as far as the structure goes, the infrastructure, there's other programs for infrastructure that that are eligible, like ECP for different farms, and possibly some ranching, like fencing and things like that, that are covered. But those are limited to specific secretarial disaster events or presidential disaster events. So there's other rules involved with that. But no, unfortunately for ELAP, there isn't any kind of infrastructure coverage at this point.
One from David is NAP or ELAP available for farm-raised fish and recirculating aquaculture systems?
Yeah, I mean, if it's in a controlled environment, it would be eligible. Part of the problem with some of those controlled environments is that, what kind of eligible weather event would affect them. And as long as it's a controlled environment and they suffer an eligible loss, they could be covered, yes.
I seem to recall down in Florida, there was a hurricane that had damaged, essentially a tree wiped out a recirculating farm's generator system. And I think in that case is a good example of where a RAS farm could be covered.
Yeah, I mean, typically, it's kind of so this is kind of an in-depth answer, right? But if you do have a disaster event and it knocks out a generator, the requirement under FSA typically is that do you have some type of backup? And so, I mean, if you have a generator, that would be considered a backup system. Typically what happens, especially this happens a lot more under the LIP program, but we have a disaster event and it takes out the electricity on a farm, and especially with poultry. And then, they have a bunch of birds that die. If they don't have a backup, like a generator, like Charlie's talking about, they wouldn't be eligible. But if you do have a backup generator and that's taken out and you lose electricity, then yes, that would be something that we could possibly cover under the hurricane.
All right, we've got another one. Is there a national price for oysters, or is that state by state price?
All prices are done state by state, as I talked a little bit about during the training. Each state committee has to establish those prices. They are established state by state. Typically, we work with our universities that have aquaculture, and try to come up with that pricing data. But no, there is no national price. It is set state to state. Now, we do make comparisons. I mean, if we have a state that has limited information, like a bordering state, let's just use Mississippi and Alabama, for instance, because, they're right beside each other. If Mississippi didn't have information and Alabama did, we could use that Alabama information as best available data. But typically it's state to state. Sometimes it's regional based, but typically we try to keep it at each individual state level.
Talk a little bit about how the state price is established.
So, each state committee, like I had stated during the training, is tasked with setting that price. And what typically happens is each state has a program chief that handles the program at the state level, and sometimes a program specialist. And they typically will work with the university to find prices that are available. Under the NAP program, when we establish prices, I mean, we have a list of items that we go down, starting with NAS. If NAS data is available by regulation, that's what we have to use first. And then after that, it becomes a matter of typically university data. We do get down to a point where if the only available information is the actual anecdotal marketing of that particular species, we've had to use that for redfish only because you know, the redfish industry is still limited to Texas, and we don't have any other information. So we do rely a lot on the sales records of those redfish in that area. But if the university has, you know, average wholesale data available, typically use that in that state.
Let's see. One question about is disease an eligible cause of loss for ELAP?
Unfortunately, disease is not an eligible cause of loss under ELAP. The LIP program is the program that has a disease eligibility, and that typically is tied. I mean, obviously, it's tied to livestock, but there's also a lot of limitations to that as well. You know, there can't be vaccination available or any kind of mitigation available in order for those animals to be eligible. But ELAP does not have that in its regulation. The disease is an eligible cause of loss.
See, Mark's asking what type of losses would be covered due to a hurricane? Most likely losses would be due to extended power outage.
Yeah, again, I mean, it really depends on what kind of system you have set up. If you do have a power outage due to a hurricane and you have generators and those are also taken out, then typically that would make them eligible. But we do require that there's a backup system for any area that could suffer from those types of losses. If you have a backup system and that gets taken out as well, then yes, under a hurricane, that's typically would be covered. And you know, and I mean, most of the time it usually ends up like aeration is the big problem, right? And that's why when the generators are gone, if the you know, or if the water, if the you know the fish are left alone and can't be tended to or something like that, and they die because of that hurricane. I mean, that's you know, those are the types of losses that would typically be covered.
Let's see, from Rusty, everyone here in the Gulf states has been very helpful as the program's been rolled out. As the first few claims are being worked out, is there a concern that a precedent may be set, used going forward, such as specific temperature as a cause for oyster mortality?
Well, we do know that, you know, as we work, I know like Alabama is working with the University of Auburn to establish an extreme heat policy for oysters in Alabama, right? And so every state is trying to establish, it isn't necessarily a precedent, but establish some kind of a threshold of what would be eligible and what wouldn't be eligible for those extreme heat losses. As we know, I mean, you know, they are typically kind of arbitrary depending on where you're located, and there's also the question of salinity levels and how they're affected, and we're working with different universities to try to come up with thresholds to establish extreme heat. So I wouldn't say that it's precedent. I would say that it's just a standard policy for each state to establish their extreme heat limitations, and of course their extreme cold too, because you know, we've had a lot of areas where we've had, you know, a lot of extreme cold in the south where we haven't typically had that in the last 4 or 5 years. So those counties or those states have been tasked with also setting an extreme cold policy as well for any qualified aquaculture that may be lost due to freeze.
Anyone else have any other specific questions? While we're waiting for someone to chime in, Seth, I don't know if we talked a little bit about it. It kind of segues again into farmers getting more involved with FSA. You know, we had just sent out an announcement really that county committees are up for accepting election nomination forms right now. Can you talk a little bit about like the county committees and the farmers that, you know, are serve on those and evaluate claims?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the county committees are elected by the region of the area that they live in. You know, depending on the county setup and the combination of the office itself, typically there's 3 to 5 members, and they're elected based off of the, you know, you can run for it just like a school board or whatever. You run for the region of the place that you live in. And then once you're, if you know, if you're elected to the county committee, then you're the representative for your region, and you would help participate in making those decisions on applications that you know, where information is provided, and aquaculture is one of them. When there's inventory records provided, county committee makes that final determination of whether or not to approve an application if they actually met the qualifications required to approve that application. So yeah, you're exactly right. If someone wanted to run for the county committee to be able to provide information or help to, you know, assess those applications, we'd be more than happy. I know that county offices are always looking for people to run for county committee. I was a CED. Sometimes it's difficult to get people to run, but it is a public service, and if you're willing to participate in that, we encourage anyone that wants to apply to get in there and file for an election.
Yeah, that's great. We encourage the same thing with aquaculture being such a unique and diverse industry around the country, and ELAP, being expanded over the last few years. I think there's a real need for aquaculture farmers to step in and donate your time if you can to help steer things in the right direction and educate. So, let's see. One more question: if a farm is flooded due to high rivers levels, what preventative measures would be required?
Typically it has to be a controlled environment. So, if you have a controlled environment and, you're not specifically using water from the river and raising your fish within that wild caught, or, trying to use the streams or whatever to raise the fish. I mean, really the whole thing is that can you control the environment that they're being raised in? If they're in a controlled environment, typically they're going to be eligible.
All right. Another question is disaster declaration from a county FSA or judge required to apply for ELAP?
No, that's a great thing about ELAP is that there doesn't have to be a presidential or secretarial disaster condition or even a state designation. Anyone's eligible to apply. If you suffer an eligible loss event, you come in and you file a notice of loss, and then you file. There's a second piece called an application for payment. Typically, the notice of loss is just to get the dates of when you suffered that loss, and then the application for payment is when we get down into the weeds about your inventory and what you're raising and the type of aquaculture that you're raising. And then that's when we pull, the beginning inventory, the ending inventory, and then we have our talk about normal mortality and whether or not that applies. But no, to answer your question, there doesn't have to be a disaster declaration. It is a permanent program that's eligible for anybody that suffers a loss.
Excellent. Sorry, Craig, I missed one from above. Can you give an example of eligible or sufficient beginning inventory records that could be provided for a farm raised fish producers that rely on breeders to produce the total inventory?
Well, I mean, typically purchase records are a great start for inventory records. It just really depends on the type of aquaculture you have. I mean, it's relatively easy with some aquaculture, as we all know, more difficult with others. What we're looking for is reliable or acceptable data, right? I mean, if you can provide us something that gets us to a substantial, estimation of what your total inventory is, depending on the type of aquaculture, I mean, you just need to work with the county committee to let them know, what is your actual inventory, or can you get us close to what that actual inventory is? And, it's gonna vary obviously from species to species. So I don't know that I have a specific example. I mean, we get all kinds of different inventory records. And it's the same with livestock as well. Everybody keeps their records different. The best records are the ones that are the easiest to process. If you maintain monthly records, it's a lot easier to apply for ELAP and get paid than if you don't maintain monthly records and you just, kind of have an estimate once a year. And so I would just encourage anybody to work with their county office, see what they have. And then if that's not acceptable to the county committee, for the county office to reach back out to the producer and tell them what else they may need.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. Just thinking again, go ahead and go in and meet, these are really nuanced discussions that you can have in person with your county agents and figure it out ahead of time, and what exactly inventory may or may not be needed depending on the species you're producing, right? And all the nuts and bolts of your specific farm. So let's see, in 2024, is prior registration with county FSA needed to apply for ELAP coverage, or is there still flexibility?
So, as I stated a little bit earlier, right now we're not charging a specific fee to go out and actually look at your farm in order to late file that acreage report. There is a fee for a late filed acreage report. There's two different versions. One of them is the one where we take your certification of where your farm is located, and there's late filed amount that we charge, and I'm not 100% sure what that is. That's not my area. But then if we do have to come out to your farm to certify that farm, there is an extended cost of what it takes for us to go out there. It's not, I mean, it's less than $100. I know that. But yeah, you do have to you'll have to late file an acreage report. But as far as the ELAP program for 2024, there is no registration. The final sales closing date is January 30th of the following year. So if you have already came in and certified your acreage, you've got until January 30th if you've suffered a loss to come in and file that notice of loss or application for payment. So we're currently in the 2024 ELAP program year.
One other question I had, aquaculture private crop insurance policies are almost non-existent. I mean, it's really that this is the reason ELAP's been so important and awesome for our industry. But if there are a few aquaculture crop insurance policies out there through private insurers, could they still participate in ELAP if they have a private crop policy?
Yes, actually, you can participate in both. The one thing that I would just be wary of is that multiple benefit exclusion right now still applies, but that could change with the farm bill. So, I mean, depending on what happens if there is a farm bill and if Congress decides to remove that exclusion, and then you wouldn't be able to. But currently, you can get crop insurance if you can get it for your farm raised fish, and you can apply for ELAP as well.
Great. Does anyone have any other last minute questions before we let Seth go? What happens if a producer doesn't have documentation of the disaster event, such as temperature logs for water?
Well, I mean, it has to be something that's an approved disaster event by the county committee. And so if you're unable to provide the documentation, I mean, we do require that the producer give us the information needed in order to set or establish that loss. So if you're unable to do that, I mean, it may be really difficult for the county committee to approve an actual loss based off of those water temperatures. The other thing that I would tell you is not every state's going to have water temperature limit already established. So if you think that you're going to get to a point where you do have extreme heat and that water temperature gets to a point where, your species is unable to survive, you probably need to be reaching out to the county committee anyway to let them know what's going on so the state committee can establish whatever rules they need to, whether it be with the National Aquaculture Association or through the university or extension or whoever. But if they don't have a policy for that and you don't have your records, it's likely that application would not be approved.
Maybe time for one more question. Anyone have any lingering thoughts? This has really been a great Q&A session. So really appreciate everybody's participation. So
luckily, I know most of the answers so far.
Oh yeah, you're a pro, Seth. So here, I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat for everyone. Please reach out. NAA can help provide you resources and contacts and assist in every way we can. So there's my cell number and email right there. So, again, this was awesome, Seth. Thanks a lot, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And just encourage everybody to go out and knock on the door of their county FSA office and say hello and participate. So, and remember, everybody, September 30th. So sign up for the upcoming crop year. So.
I was just going to say, those are probably the most important things to take away from today is that you need to get in and talk to your county office and get your acreage certification for 2025 because that's coming up soon. So
you can actually just go in before September 30th and go ahead.
Yeah, you can go in right now and certify for 2025. You should be doing that. Yeah, it's call in, set up an appointment, and let them know that you want to establish and certify your farm, and they'd be more than happy to do that. But Charlie, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to come and talk to everybody again. Our relationship with NAA is super important when it comes to the ELAP policy and how we implement the program. So thank you, and thanks for everyone today for allowing me to come and talk to you.
Excellent. Well, we'll close out on that awesome comment. So everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you on July's webinar coming up next month. So take care.
Thank you.